there, everybody. Great to have you join us again. I'm delighted that I'm joined just now by Taylor Scott Davis, the American composer, who will be joining us in Cumnock for the Scottish premiere of his Magnificat on Saturday the 4th of October. This will be performed by our chorus, the Cumnock Tryst Festival Chorus, and the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Eamon Dugan. But the choir will also be joined by 20 of Taylor's young choristers from the church that he works in Texas. So we're looking forward to this wonderful multicultural event when Scotland and Texas comes together. So this concert will take place in the Barony Hall in Barony campus in Cumnock at 7:30 p.m. on Saturday the 4th of October. And I'm going to ask Taylor about the piece that we're going to hear that night, his Magnificat, and about his music generally. But before that, and welcome Taylor, welcome to our podcast. I'd like to ask you, Taylor, something probably that our listeners will be keen to know before we get into the detail of the music. Basically, what have you been up to recently? What have you been doing in the last few days, hours even, weeks and months in your work as a musician?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. It's great to just talk shop. I hope people find that stuff as interesting as perhaps you and I do. I've had an incredibly busy season. I finished 4 commissions before the month of June, and 2 of them were of just kind of standard size, like maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes, a cappella music. One of them was a 45-minute work for orchestra and choir entitled The Poetry of Psalms, which takes poems over the last couple of hundred years and pairs them with psalms, so secular and sacred voice, and I just tried to find poetry that would sort of enhance, I guess, the psalms that I chose. And then another piece that I finished for a June recording was my Requiem for the Voces 8 Foundation, and wrapped that up by early June, and we recorded it there in London. And since then, I've kind of been giving my ears a bit of a rest. I find that I need to seasonally just sort of unplug a little bit. And now that that season is over, I'm jumping back into all sorts of various projects, including coming over to Scotland.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So what is your backstory then, Taylor? Where are you from? What could you describe your musical journey, your education, who your teachers were, who your influences have been as a composer?
Yeah, so my dad is a prominent church musician in Houston, Texas. He's at a large Methodist church called St. Luke's, and has been there for 30 years. In my growing up, I just sort of embodied the unpaid intern. You know, if he needed an extra voice, I stepped in. If he needed something written, I stepped in. If he needed people to put out stands and music before they did the, I don't know, Brahms Requiem, I did it. I was sort of all in. And for a while when I was growing up, my father made as much money playing jazz piano at the Tower Club in downtown Dallas as he made at his church job. So it was quite lucrative for him to have these 2 jobs that paid a full-time wage. And because of that, I grew up listening as much to, say, the Schubert Mass in G as I did listening to all of these great old jazz standards. And so I had this very eclectic upbringing as far as music was concerned. I went off to school. I went to Centenary College in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is where both of my parents went. And it's a very small liberal arts school, about 800 students in total. And of those, maybe 70 were in the music school. So it was very hands-on. You know, we got to do things that if you were in a regular university of reasonable size might be held off for juniors or seniors or perhaps teaching assistants. But because none of that existed, we got to sing with the Shreveport Opera and Symphony and run rehearsal. I mean, it was an incredible experience. So did that, and along the way, I would say largely thanks to my dad's contacts, I enjoyed lots of good composition lessons from people like Jane Marshall and Alice Parker, two very notable U.S. composers, and then various conductors from around. So I came by it honestly and naturally, and but I was also willing to put in the work to be my own force and not just borrowed, from my dad's connections. So that's how I got here.
Mm-hmm. And when you're not composing or conducting, you serve as the director of music and worship arts at St. Andrew's Methodist Church in Plano. Is it Plano, Texas?
That's right.
Could you describe your activities there for us, please?
Yeah, sure. First of all, the word Plano just means flat, which is completely appropriate because there's not a hill in sight. At least not one that God intended. We have overpasses, for freeways and such. I run a program that is eager to start children singing at an early age. And we have a burgeoning children's choir program, almost 100 kids every week singing. We have our chancel choir, which is about an 80 to 90 voice, largely volunteer choir. We have handbells. We have relationships with various groups that, like this brass ensemble called Imperial Brass that has a residency at the church. But then we also take quite seriously the need for music education, specifically music education that impacts the neighborhoods around St. Andrew. And so like this coming week, the Voces 8 Scholars, the U.S. Scholar program for the Voces 8 Foundation, will start its season with us. And for the last, I think, 9 years, that has been the case. And so we very proudly welcome them, and then they go out into our schools and get some hands-on training. So it's a multifaceted program, everything from handbells to children and scholars. It's a lot, but it's fun. I love doing it.
It sounds as if it's a big parish then, if you've got all these musicians involved.
It is, yeah. The churches, particularly in the southern part of the U.S., are these kind of behemoth entities. There are times I don't love how that comes across, and the connotation within, but I think St. Andrew in particular does a really good job of embracing the fact that there's a church that has a lot of resources, and they want to use those resources for good. And their sense of neighbor is quite wide at the church. So it makes me proud when we're doing good stuff out in the world and not just sort of patting ourselves on the back every week.
And what does the liturgy look like and sound like in St. Andrew? It's a Methodist church, so today, for example, you would have a Eucharist service in the church, and therefore you must have been quite busy.
Yeah, that's right. So I oversee 3 services. One is on Saturday night, 2 on Sunday morning. And on Saturday night, that's a very casual service. Often people are in jeans and polo shirts. They're perhaps coming from running around with their kids or grandkids, dropping folks off at soccer practice, stuff like that. So that's a bit more casual. Then 9:30 on Sunday mornings is a bit more formal in the way people dress, in the liturgy that we use. And then we have an 11 o'clock service that's in our chapel, and it is the most formal service we have. And prayers of illumination and all sorts of stuff that doesn't exist in either of the other two services. And I think that one probably does the most, it takes the deepest dive, I'll say, in the historical words of the church.
And the repertoire that you use for these is very widespread, from different eras and points in history.
That's right. Very proudly done new music. We've commissioned stuff from recent composers, and then we sing music that's 400 years old. We celebrate hymns that were written in the 400s. It's quite the gamut. But I do feel compelled that every week we can't meet everybody's musical expectations or needs. And so if somebody shows up one week and we're singing in Latin and they don't quite understand why or what it means, then I can assure them that if they show up the next week, it'll probably be something in English. It'll probably be something by a living composer. And I just think the balance of old and new is really important.
And so the patron of your church is St Andrew. You probably know that the patron of our country, Scotland, is St Andrew too. Is there a Scottish dimension to that part of Texas or that parish?
No. Are you ready for the worst possible answer to your question? The church was founded in 1986, and a group of its very first members got together in a living room, and they were making decisions about what to call it. And the church, the person who was the senior leader, wanted to call it Good Shepherd Methodist Church. And people were kind of lukewarm to that idea. And somebody said, maybe we should just open the phone book and see what the traditional sounding names have represented in there. And they didn't see a St. Andrew. They saw a St. Luke's, they saw a St. John's, they saw a St. Matthew's, all these different churches, but no St. Andrew. And they said, well, the other thing is if we do St. Andrew, we'll be at the top of the alphabetical listing in the phone book. So that said, I will acknowledge that the church is a very welcoming group. And I think when the senior pastor realized that his name, Good Shepherd Methodist, was not going to go through and that St. Andrew was going to go through, he took very seriously who Andrew was in the wider Christian story and was going to be a person that invited folks. And so that's kind of the humble beginnings that turned very real very quickly, and the church just grew and grew.
Fabulous. That's as good a reason as anything to call it your church, St Andrew. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the very important collaborations that you've had with various ensembles. I read of you writing for the American choir Conspirare, and you've written some significant music already for Voces 8, and you're about to begin a very close official relationship with them. Could you talk about these two ensembles, how you worked with them, and any others that you may want to mention?
So my relationship with Conspirare really developed out of my appreciation for what their artistic director was doing in the world. He's just he's a wonderful human being, primarily. And then beyond that, he is a musical genius. And so the stuff that he was pulling together for concerts, as I was coming into my own as a young professional, was just, it was so inspiring. So I wrote him and included 3 recently published pieces of music and just said, I admire you so much, and if you found any value in programming these pieces, I would love that. And if you ever need something written specifically, I would gladly help out. And I was lying in bed in an apartment, just about to turn off the light because it was like 10:15, 10:30 at night, and he sent me a text and said, "Taylor, Craig Hella Johnson here. I'd love to chat with you." And I just almost jumped out of bed like it was Christmas morning and I was 8 years old. So that began that relationship, and again, I was just in awe of what he was extracting from his singers, and the fact that his singers would walk through a wall for him. It was just this incredible give and take. The relationship with Voces 8 began when a good friend of mine introduced me to Paul and Barney, and I remember we met at an ACDA, American Choral Directors Association, and I asked Paul if I could buy him dinner, not because I had any grand plans like I was going to worm my way into his heart. I just wanted to say welcome to this country and get to know him a little bit. And I think we had dinner for like 3 hours that night. And part of what came up was that I write, but the other part of what came up was that I had a church job where I could invite Voces 8 to collaborate with us to do work in the community. And so we did. We just kicked off this friendship and haven't looked back. And as you said just a few minutes ago, I am, as of this month, the composer in residence for the next couple of years for the Voces 8 Foundation. And I think so highly of Paul and Barney and the work they've done, and writing for that group has been an immense gift for me.
Wonderful, and hopefully one day we'll be able to get Voces 8 to the Cumnock Tryst too. An extraordinary ensemble. You mentioned there in passing the American Choral Directors Association. I've heard some wonderful stories about this legendary organisation and its conferences and so on. There seems to be thousands of people attend, and a whole range of very different kind of music is presented and shared. Could you tell our British audience about what happens at these conferences, what it's all about?
Yeah, is the one in the UK called ABCD? Is that what you all? Yeah. Okay, so similar to that, I would suppose. But every other year we have a national conference, and those national conferences are held in large cities for obvious reasons, because we need the infrastructure of hotels and restaurants and whatnot. But as you say, people come out by the thousands, and every day there are a series of special interest sessions and concerts, and they have enough people register that you have a track. And so sometimes, perhaps there's a year when the two tracks are, one is the color red and one is the color blue. And so if you're on the red track, you have to go to specific concerts on specific days, and those would be opposite of the blue track. And so we just sort of are like ships in the night sometimes. Your closest colleagues could be on the other track, and they will have just seen a concert that you're perhaps on your way to, or they just came from a course that you're on your way to. But it's everything from how to seat a choir in a volunteer choir situation, as opposed to, a professional ensemble like Conspirare or Voces 8, to how to engage young people when their voices are changing, stuff like that. And it's just a chance to sort of refresh yourself for the year ahead. And then on the off years, when we don't meet as a national body, we meet regionally. And so I'm in the Southwest region of ACDA. And so the same thing happens, but on a slightly smaller scale. Our next regional ACDA will be in Albuquerque, for instance, which is not large enough for the full ACDA, but is the perfect size for a regional ACDA. So it'll be fun to go and to hear music that matters to New Mexico, see some of the colleges and high school choirs that represent that culture so well. So that's ACDA in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think are the main musical differences between choral experiences and choral styles and sounds between the UK and the US?
I think the choral sound that the UK has is the envy of the world. Truly, every American choir sort of points to that Anglican sound and says that, listen to this recording. If somebody's picking a piece of music and they want to send their ensemble a YouTube clip, for instance, it will inevitably be somebody at fill in the blank cathedral in the middle of the UK. I think that sound is quite ethereal, whereas the American sound has a lot of gravity to it. I don't know quite how to describe it other than there's a richness to both, but the sounds, one just sounds like it's sort of floating above your head, and one sounds like it's the earth beneath your feet. As far as the music that we celebrate, I think you all do a better job of knowing with historical accuracy what is asked of ensembles. Our folks perhaps would pick up Messiah and sing through it, and it feels like in the UK folks would pick up a Messiah book and understand the ask from a dynamic standpoint, or like how big the ensemble should be in comparison to the orchestra, stuff like that. And I don't imagine that anybody over there thinks twice about it, but I look at it and think, oh my gosh, those are some educated folks when they're putting these things together. So there's nothing wrong with how we make music in the US. I just think you all have been around a lot longer in the art making world, and it shows.
And so, about your own music, Taylor, how would you yourself describe your musical style or the aesthetic in your own music?
Do I get to ask you the same question after I'm done answering, or is that?
Why not? Why not?
Yeah, okay. I was really inspired some years ago when I saw that Bob Chilcott described his music as accessible. I think that's often used in a slanderous sort of way. And here's this really flowing lyrical music, and he's not shying away from the fact that he's writing it in hopes that more people than not could do it. And I would say I strive for that. And in particular, I think with music like the Magnificat or when the Requiem is released, I think I tend to write understanding that the orchestra players, like on the Cumnock Festival, are the professionals, and the singers are the paraprofessionals, or volunteers that just put in enough time. And those two things can then complement one another. The orchestra does a lot of heavy lifting, and it really brings the notes off the page when it's put with a choir that in short order can really wrap their arms around ins and outs. So if I can use the word accessible, but in a positive way, in a Bob Chilcott kind of way, I'll say that accessibility really matters to me. I love romantic music. I love the flowing lines, a bit of the chromaticism and the leaps that they were taking with their intervals. I really admire the Brahms of the world and Fauré, Schubert, Schumann, and so I've tried to listen to as much of that stuff as I can because I think it benefits me. All right, so how would you describe your music?
Well, yes, I realise it was a very unfair question because I hate getting asked this question. I have some odd conversations sometimes with Glasgow taxi drivers about what I do, and trying to explain it can be quite odd. But I suppose that I've been through various stages. I've always, like many composers that have trained in universities and colleges, maybe over in Europe, especially so, one was drawn, especially when I was younger, in the 70s and 80s, towards what we regarded as a modernist aesthetic. We used to use the term avant-garde as if it meant something. And at one time, the whole modernist European thing was a big thing for me. The living composers when I was young were people like Boulez and Stockhausen and Burial, and in the UK, people like Harrison Birtwistle and Maxwell Davis. And Maxwell Davis was a friend of mine. And all that experience of modernism was important to me. But I seem to have drifted for various reasons away from that world. And one of the mechanisms for the drift, I think, was my abiding love of choral music. And I realised that there is a way of writing for voices where you have to respect the authenticity of some of the things you were talking about, the flowering of lines, the certain diatonic intervals, what voices can do really well in concert or in solo situations. And that sense of line, that sense of getting to the heart of what vocal music, choral music has changed me, I think. I hate having to describe what I do, and I usually leave it to other people. And some of those reactions to my music are very different. Some people find my music very austere and very modern and strange and sometimes esoteric. And there are others, especially in the world of contemporary music, who regard my music as using that slanderous term, accessible and too conservative. So I can't really account for that, for the difference, except that people have different tastes and different experiences, and I suppose different ideas of where modern music should be going. And I'm somewhere caught in the middle. But I do find that there's some of my music can seem to some quite challenging, to use that word, and for others there's a new simplicity beginning to emerge. I especially love to bring choirs together with orchestral sound. I'm doing a lot of that more, and perhaps that's bringing about the two different aspirations, the two different worlds to meld together.
I also find myself really drawn to an orchestra and choir pairing. I think it's good for both. I think the instrumentalists lift up the voice, and I think the voices are providing the instrumentalists with a series of words that they otherwise don't have. The oboe player does not have a set of lyrics on their stand while they play, and so I just think it's the best pairing, and it's great fun to extract color from both the choral ensemble and the instrumental ensemble, and see what you can come up with.
That's great, Taylor. My last question just now is about American music again, funnily enough. Do you think there is such a thing as a contemporary classical American style in choral music? Is there a school as such? And the reason I ask is there are a number of very prominent names which have gradually come more to the fore in a more international, universal sense from the United States. Names and figures that are widely known and recognised now, especially in the last 20 years. And I think you're one of those that have emerged. But would you say there's a common thread to some of that music?
I think one of the things that has emerged from the U.S. in about that 20-25 year window is the cluster chord sound that Eric Whitacre really dug into. Now, if you back up, say 5 years from Eric Whitacre's meteoric rise, you had Morton Lauridsen experimenting with cluster chords, but essentially just adding a little shimmer with a standard chord. So there was still the meat and potatoes were there, a C, E, and G, but at the top he was adding a D, and so there was this shine to it, and at the same time it was it was different. It had a little bit of itch to it, but it was different. It was good. Eric then came along and was this young gun who was almost immediately successful in the high school, college world, and his cluster chords would move from cluster chord to cluster chord, and you didn't necessarily know where you were tonally. And I think that opened the door for a lot of people to join in the experiment. Chris Moore, who is a baritone for Voces 8, says there's nothing quite like the full fat version that you can really kind of only get from Eric Whitacre himself. But a lot of people have been able to pick up on that sound and use it in their own kind of authentic way. And I'll include myself in that. I'm attracted to it. I think a little goes a long way. And perhaps some of that for me is just acknowledging that I don't really think in terms of cluster chords. I really think more melodically and then add support underneath that. So if I have little moments that that sound perhaps like they were inspired by Eric, I'm glad to acknowledge that, but they don't last for very long because I'm always looking ahead to my more native voice. So I think Lauridsen paved the way for Whitacre, and I think Whitacre is still this incredibly popular sound that Americans perhaps don't even realize is quite unique to the American choral tapestry.
That's great, fascinating to hear your insight into that and all these other things then, Taylor. It's been great chatting with you, and we can't wait till you all arrive with us not too long, just a few weeks now, and the festival chorus have been loving your work and have been deep in rehearsal. The rehearsals have started again over the last few weeks, and we're getting back into it next week. And yes, so we look forward to bringing you to Scotland, maybe for the first time. I'm not sure whether you've been to Scotland before.
It'll be the second time, but I've only ever been to Edinburgh and Glasgow. So I'm looking forward to being in Cumnock, and maybe I'm saying this correctly, Minishant is...
Minishant, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's where my Airbnb is.
Excellent.
So I'm looking forward to the countryside a little bit.
Great. Well, Ayrshire will give you a hearty welcome when you all arrive. So, Taylor, Scott Davies, many thanks for joining me this evening, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.